We're glad that you're here. I got to share something personal before we jump in. Just want to say a big thank you for those that were aware. A week ago yesterday, Susie's mom, Bobby, passed away, passed on to the next life, and she had been fighting lung cancer, and she was home with us, and we were able to honor her last wishes not to go anywhere else. And I just want to say thank you for the prayers because they have been felt. Susie, Sherry, they are doing very well. The family's doing very well because prayers make a difference. And we just want to say thank you for that. We don't need anything. There's nothing that we need. There's just going to be a private service for the family because Bobby was very private. And so just keep praying, and we just certainly appreciate it. Now, last week I gave you a warning that I was going to do this one last time, and so there may be a couple people that are ready for this, so I'd like to see your hands, and I'll try to grab the first person. I'll kind of use my peripheral vision here. Does anyone know what John 14:9 says, what Jesus said in John 14:9? Okay. All right, I'm going to keep PDQ lunch right here then. Yeah. Well, tell me. That's the whole point. You need to know. Okay, come on up here. Okay. He's got it. Come on. You're staff, so I'll reduce it in half. I mean, that's good. I mean, it wasn't that they weren't warned. I mean, they were warned it was coming, and that's the last time that I'm offering free PDQ lunch. John 14:9, Jesus said, "He who has seen me has seen the Father." And in this sermon series, we're taking a look at characteristics of God's heart as seen as Jesus is interacting with hurting people. Jesus is revealing the heart of God as he's talking with outcasts, as he's ministering to them, people that are hurting for someone else, maybe not just themselves. And we've looked at a heart that touches, a heart that marvels, a heart that accepts, and today we look at a heart that cares. Waiting has got to be one of the most common experiences that can unify us together, and yet it's one of the most difficult of life experiences is when we're in the waiting room. When we're waiting, our emotions can swing widely from hope to terror, from possibility to despair, from faith to doubt. And in Mark chapter 5, Jesus encounters one person whose wait seems relatively brief, but another person's whose wait has been over a 12-year period. One battled for the daughter whom he loved, and the other battled for themselves that their health would be restored. I don't know whether you've noticed this or not, but in the last several decades, manufacturers create things so that they have to be replaced. Things are not made the way they used to be made. We live in a generation, in a society that replaces things very quickly because they're made to be broken. Well, in the Roman world, women were seen in the first century to have very little value. They were replaceable. And nothing could be further from the truth, because you ask any man who's married to a great woman or has daughters, those women are irreplaceable. I speak for myself. Well, where's the PDQ cards for that? Man, we'd be selling them out like crazy. You'd be like, I won you PDQ lunch, babe. You had your chance. So in the Roman world, women just were viewed as replaceable, but Jesus had a heart for people who were viewed as having little or no value. And it turns out that the two daughters that we look at today, they are connected. They are connected by the actions of the story. They're connected by the actions of Christ's miraculous power. And by looking at them, we're going to see this kind of unfold like a drama in 3 acts. Act number 1, and this may have surprised the Romans because it has to do with a desperate father who wants his little girl to be saved. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. Now, there's at least two kinds of suffering, and both can be excruciating. The first kind is primary suffering. That's when you and I go through something ourselves, and we have pain, and we've got agony, and we've got brokenness. That's primary suffering. But there's also secondary suffering, and that's when you're not doing the suffering necessarily, but you're suffering because someone else is suffering with the actual pain. You're not necessarily in pain, but you've got the emotional and the spiritual burden because of someone else. Now, as a parent and as a grandparent, I know of nothing more frustrating and painful as when my kids are going through something or my grandkids are going through something, they're suffering, and I can't do anything about it. And that's Jairus' situation as he comes to Jesus and pleads for his little girl. The fact that Jairus is a ruler, a synagogue ruler in the Capernaum synagogue is significant because in week 1, we talked about the leper who was healed, and Jesus told him to go show himself to the priest. That would have been in Capernaum. And then in week 2, we talked about the Roman centurion who gave out of his own resources and helped the synagogue be built. That was also in Capernaum. And so now we have Jairus, who is a synagogue leader. He's coming to Jesus. And the popularity of Jesus is growing. And while Jesus' popularity is growing, the synagogue leaders are starting to take note of him. And Jairus comes to Jesus and he humbles himself and he falls at Jesus' feet. It is an act of humility. It is an action that speaks of worship. And Jairus is not the least bit hesitant to publicly humble himself because his daughter is in desperate need. And so his pride, he doesn't care about his pride. He doesn't care about his position. What he cares about is his little girl. And the words, "my little daughter," have a sweet connotation to them. It speaks of love mingled with pain, with hurt. It's a tender, it's a sweet phrase expressing his deep concern and love for his daughter. And that stood in dramatic contrast to the Roman world, that culture of abandonment. You see, many Roman families, when they had little girls, they would put them on the trash heaps because they wanted sons. And when a little girl was placed on the trash heap, the Christians, people that were following Jesus, would go and rescue those little girls and raise them as their own. Jairus is convinced that Jesus is the only help. He is the only hope for his little girl. And this mission of mercy was well received by Jesus. It was rewarded. Jesus said, "Listen, I'll go to your house and I will heal your daughter and restore the joy of your heart." But Act 1 of the story, a desperate father, is interrupted by Act 2 of a desperate woman. So Jesus went with him, a large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately her bleeding stopped and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding around you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" Now, in week 1, we talked about a heart that touches. That deserved a slap. I'm just saying. But Jesus didn't do it. He didn't reach out and touch them, but they deserved it. Just saying. But Jesus kept his cool. That's Tedrick translation. But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." This woman's driven to Jesus. Driven to Jesus because she views him as the only possibility of her relief. He is the solution for her need. And as it turns out, Jairus isn't the only person in the crowd who is desperate. It seems like there's a little desperation in the entire crowd. The scene almost is frantic. The crowd is pressing on Jesus. It's a suffocating kind of a word. And so Jairus and Jesus, maybe they could hardly breathe. Maybe they could hardly move. The crowd was pressing. Maybe Jairus got separated from Jesus. Can you imagine if he got separated for a moment because of the pressing crowd? I mean, does Jesus know his way to Jairus' house? Well, of course, yes, he does. But Jairus doesn't necessarily know that. He was going to take him to his house. And in this mob, there's only one person's panic who rose to the same level of degree as Jairus. It's this woman who approached Jesus through the crowd who was struggling with her own pain. Historically, she's known as the woman with the issue of blood. But what's amazing, what's unique, is that there's nothing in the gospel record that identifies who she is. So her anonymity, the secret of her name, not knowing who she is, fits within the narrative as the culture's view, as they viewed women, and they had such a low view. She was suffering from a bloody hemorrhage for 12 years. 12 years. And there seems to be no solution, no medical solution anyway. The doctors had drained her, bled her dry of all her resources, and she didn't get better, she got worse. And being that this was most likely a menstrual hemorrhage, she would have lived 12 years as a ceremonially unclean person based on Leviticus 15. She would have been rendered useless for the one thing that culture did value women for, that was childbearing. She wouldn't be able to have children. And so she lived the same type of life that the leper would have lived. The rabbinic teachings say that her position in the synagogue would have been lost. The temple, no access. She could have been divorced from her husband. She would have been shut out from family life. She would have been ostracized from the life of the community. And so with no place left to go, where does she go? She goes to Jesus. And touching his garment, that was her last hope. And the degree of desperation, the degree of her desperation can be seen as evidence as she struggles to get through the crowd. Think about this. 12 years of a bleeding issue, she's weakened, and yet she fights her way through the crowd. She will not be deterred. She is going to reach Jesus' garment if it's the last thing she does. And with the leper, Jesus touched him. But here, this desperate woman reaches out and touches Jesus, and instantly that touch cures her. Her hemorrhage dries up. Power flowed from Jesus. She knew it. He knew it. And the Greek tense is absolute. What does that mean for us English-speaking people that we know? It's Greek to me. We don't know Greek. What does it mean that the tense is absolute? It means it was immediate. It was complete. It was a permanent cure. And she instantly knew it. She could tell. Her perpetual weakness had been replaced by renewed strength. And once she was healed, it seems like she tried to kind of hide in the crowd, but Jesus stopped the crowd in mid-journey and said, "Who touched me?" And I mean, of course, the disciples gave it to Jesus, but he wasn't going to be deterred from that. Who touched me? It wasn't that Jesus didn't know who touched him. Power had gone out from him. He recognized that power had accomplished some type of miracle. He asked the question so that she could declare the healing and begin social restoration, that process. That's why he asked. So the woman who was terrified, why was she terrified? It's because she violated every social taboo to get to Jesus. By the letter of the law, every single person that she would have touched in that crowd would have been ceremonially unclean. So her audacious act, while it secured her healing, would have been seen as a violation against the community. And when she was summoned by the rescuer, when Jesus summoned her, she stepped forward and she owned what she had done. What did she do? She fell at Jesus' feet. The same thing Jairus had just done. She discovers that her fears were unnecessary. Jesus cared. Jesus looked at her and calms her heart and calls her daughter. Now, the last time this crowd heard those words, they fell from the lips of Jairus, my little daughter. And here Jesus connects with this woman by saying the same thing. And throughout the gospel records, this is the only time that Jesus calls a woman daughter. It's filled with affection, it's filled with warmth, it's filled with love, and it's filled with care. And it's all that is wrapped up in the word daughter. And if you have daughters, you know how that feels. The rescued woman ends up going her own way, and Jairus once again becomes the focus of Act 3 with a dramatic rescue. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. For 12 years, the woman who had had the bleeding hemorrhage, she suffered in waiting, longing for rescue. But the instant Jesus stopped the procession and turned his attention to her, Jairus is suddenly put in the waiting room. And it doesn't take a massive amount of biblical imagination or biblical knowledge to get inside of Jairus' head and start thinking about what he must have been thinking about. I mean, as a dad, he's concerned for his little girl, and he must have been going a little stir crazy. I mean, what are you doing? We don't have a second to spare. We've got to keep moving or else my daughter's going to die. And then Jairus' worst nightmare happens. As Jesus concludes his conversation with the woman, a messenger from Jairus' house tells him the heart-shattering news. His child is gone. His child is dead. And Jairus' momentary sense of hope that arose when Jesus said, "I'm going to come to your house," it's evaporated. Have you ever experienced that? I know I have. When you're filled with hope, and then all of a sudden, man, the rug is pulled out from underneath you, and you just feel like your hope just got dashed on the rocks, and it's looking bad. What remained in Jairus was grief and loss, the immeasurably painful, empty ache of a parent that comes upon them when that parent has to bury a child. I can't even imagine what that is like. Jesus, however, is undaunted by the news. He assured Jairus, all's going to be well. Just believe. And he continued on to his home. And when Jesus was informed that the child, when he said to them that the child wasn't dead, that she was just sleeping, I mean, they just start laughing. It's not the first time that people laughed at Jesus. It certainly wasn't the last time people laughed at Jesus. And Jesus, accompanied by Peter, James, and John, and the little girl's mother and Jairus, he goes into the room, grabs her hand, calls out to her, because it wasn't a time for sleeping. It wasn't a time for dying. The presence of the one who is the resurrection and the life was right there. It was a day for restoration. It was a day for a resurrection. The little girl rises up and is restored to her parents. And don't you just love the practicality of Jesus? He says, give her something to eat. Apparently, being dead works up an appetite. And then Mark tells us something amazing. That the age of the little girl was 12 years old. Seems to me, I've heard that number before. The same exact amount of time that the woman with the hemorrhage had been ill. These two daughters are linked together by the miraculous work of Christ and by their own experiences, but kind of in reverse. As the woman had 12 years of isolation and pain and struggle, Jairus had 12 years of joy with his little girl. And just as this woman's 12 years hemorrhage dried up and was cured and was healed by the touching of Jesus, so Jairus' daughter, who had just died, is restored back to life by the Master's hand. 12 years, 2 daughters, 1 Christ. Now, I can bring out a powerful life lesson here and tell you that our lives are interconnected in ways that we don't even know. 12 years, 12 years. These two individuals did not know each other. Their circles were totally different. There was no awareness, and yet they are connected for the power and the glory of the kingdom of Jesus Christ. Our lives are interconnected in much of the same exact way. And we don't even know it. We may not even realize it. So when we say we are in this together, we are in this together for his glory. Jairus and the woman healed, they ring out the joy of that experience that comes when the waiting is over and you receive the best possible solution. There's something amazing, there's something heartwarming about the ending of a story when it ends the way you want to. I mean, I don't like those movies, I don't like those books when you get to the end of it, and I mean, that ending absolutely stinks. I could have written a better ending. I like the fairy tale ending, even if it's in the make-believe world. But in real life is not always as accommodating as that. Because sometimes we have cares that no one seems to care about. And in the face of such despair, Christ, he speaks words of hope. We may not all have that same tangible result of being healed from a bloody hemorrhage or being able to have our daughter raised from the dead, but his comfort, the comfort of the Savior, enters into our own times of waiting and in our brokenness, just as in these instances, just as substantial ways as Jairus' daughter and the woman who'd suffered from the bleeding. That love is proven and displayed on the cross of Calvary. And it is not negated in any way by the pain and the hurt and the brokenness that we have in our lives. His heart for us is proven all the more when he enters into our pain and he enters into our brokenness in our times of waiting. You know, Jesus reached out to these two girls, woman and a little girl, and he showed that he cared, even though they were a part of a world that didn't care for them. They weren't special. Little concern was given outside of their immediate family or themselves. But that's what Jesus does. He cares for people who may not think that nobody cares for them. He does. He cares. And he cares for you. So what's our faith step? I want you to demonstrate care for someone this week in a life-changing way. Susie and I talk about this all the time in various ways. We talk about not just meeting people's expectation, but exceeding expectation. You think you're going to get $10? You get 20. You know, you think that you're going to get one meal, you're going to get 2 meals. You think that, you know, I'm going to show up one day in a row, I show up 5 days in a row. We talk about all that all the time, but exceeding people's expectation. And we aren't always successful, but that's our intent. And so when I encourage you to reach out and to show care for someone this week, I'm not talking about just meeting an expectation, because we do that all the time. I want you to really pray about this. I want you to exceed the normal care for someone and provide life-changing care. It may not be raising someone from the dead. If it is, you and I need to talk, okay? Because I want in on that. It may not be removing a bloody hemorrhage for someone or providing healing, but there's some other type of healing. There's something else that you can do that will reach out and demonstrate to someone that you care. And not just you, because I want to encourage you to do it as quiet as possible. They may not even know it's you. Do it so that Jesus receives the glory, because it's really about him, and we are connected for the glory of Jesus Christ.